talk a little bit about economic development and a couple of things. I've been involved in economic development from a couple of different perspectives. I was on the St. Croix County Economic Development Board for a while. I still serve on the Richmond has an economic development entity, and I'm involved in that. As you're aware, we do a lot of municipal work, and so I get that economic development picture from the municipal side of it. And so I've looked at it from different ways. Right now, I'm kind of, now that I'm off the St. Croix County Economic Development Board, I'm trying to work on an issue that to kind of connect. There's an organization in the Twin Cities called Greater MSP, which is the Twin Cities Economic Development Entity, and it's part publicly funded, about 30%, privately funded, about 70%. And Pierce and St. Croix County are part of that organization. But if you go to their website and you look at it, and it'll show the various counties, it's Washington County and Hennepin and Ramsey and all that, and it gets out to some outlying areas because I think there's 12 or 13 counties that are involved in it all together. And it'll have a page that's industrial parks. And so it'll show all of the Minnesota industrial parks, a little dot where all those are, and then it's got Pierce and St. Croix County over here, and they're just white. There's nothing in there. And so anyway, I'm trying to bridge the gap between that organization and Pierce and St. Croix County, because as all of you are aware, at least in this part of the state, what drives the economy is the Twin Cities. I mean, what I often say about economic development is that, in my experience has been, is that people don't pick up their businesses and move it someplace. It happens on occasion, but it just doesn't happen very often. Where economic development comes from is expansion of an existing business, growth or a startup business that then grows and becomes larger. But the one thing that I would say for this area is that potentially, Twin Cities business could move over here, and they don't have to really move their business. They don't have to move their key employees. They don't have to. They can just get in their car and drive across the bridge, go in the other direction during rush hour. And so from our side of it, it's a benefit. It's easy pickings. Where the folks down in Madison, they're going to China to get somebody, or they're going to go to South America. The governor was here, the governor was there getting it. I look at it as, if we're going to spend some marketing dollars, it might be worthwhile to spend some marketing dollars just to go, 5 miles across, a little stretch of the interstate and get somebody from there. And so, fortunately, some people down in Madison have kind of bought into that from the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, and so we're starting to make some progress on that. And some of the members of the board over there, Health Partners is on that. Jay Lund is the president of Anderson Windows is on there, and they're on both sides of the board. I mean, Anderson's in Stillwater. They've got a plant over in Menominee. They've got, so they've got people both sides. Health Partners has got facilities on the Minnesota side. They've got, in fact, are we Health Partners? Yes, thanks, Jill. We have Health Partners that provide the benefits at our office. And so, they're on both sides of it. And one of the things that I want to convey about that is that, for the politicians, it's a big deal. I get that. But, to the extent that the politicians are really, if I'm unemployed and I don't have a job, do I really care? If I lost my job from Osceola, working at Polaris, if there's a job in Forest Lake, do I really care that that's in Minnesota? We do, I don't know what the statistics are, but generally, most of the makeup of are there any North Hudson board members here? I don't see any. Anyway, I usually think of North Hudson being represented by 3M, because all the people that live in North Hudson, a lot of 3M, people that work there, execs and retired people from there, they kind of, their board, for usually 1 or 2 people on the board in North Hudson are 3M folks. So from the folks down on the ground, and for the people who need jobs, it really doesn't matter where the job is. The question is, am I qualified for the job, and can I commute to it on a reasonable basis? And I think in my notes here someplace I know somebody who commutes every day from Grantsburg to downtown Minneapolis. Now, I don't know that that's a reasonable basis, but I do get up on the road early in the morning sometimes. We have an office in Menominee, and I go to that office, and I tell you, it is even as far as Menominee, it's bumper to bumper going to the cities at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's just the way it is. And so for this particular area of the state, it really is a Twin Cities driven market. And so one of the things that has to be done is to figure out how to, I would like to see a way to figure out to do that on a cooperative basis as opposed to a competitive basis. It's not a zero-sum game. You know, Craig, you're involved in basketball, I like sports. You know, who wins and who loses? That's not economic development from my perspective. Economic development should be a win-win for everybody, because if somebody locates a business in Woodbury, or they locate it in Hudson, or they put it in River Falls, or they're up in Osceola, you know, there's jobs there. People are going to be employed. That's what's going to drive the economy. That's what's going to buy houses. That's how that's going to work. And so, you know, those things I think are important for people to keep in mind, and not to be just separate. And it's a community-wide thing too. You know, we're all competitive among communities, and you know, Hudson competes against New Richmond, and you know, you have schools and they're competing and stuff like that. But you know, if somebody decides to expand their facility in Somerset, well, there's going to be people in Richmond that are going to be working there, and there's going to be people from Baldwin that are working there, and there's going to be people from Hudson that can get there. And so, just to kind of drive home that point, I want to just ask a few questions that I was thinking about, that because I'm trying so hard with this greater MSP thing, I want to just drive home this point a little bit. And so I want to see a show of hands of how many people here, if you're still working, you're not retired, how many people work in the community that they live in? Okay? And how many people work in a different community than they live in? Okay. Now, how many of the people here know somebody that lives in their community, but they actually work in a different community? I assume everybody's got that situation. Okay. How many people here shop in a community different from where they live? I know my wife supports her burgers. I mean, she buys stock at burgers. Okay, so that's, you know, we do that. How many people here work in a business in which your business sells its product or its services to someplace other than your community? Okay. This is for my wife's benefit. How many here have done any retail shopping in the Twin Cities? You know, we've all been there, okay? So I guess my point from all of that is that as much as each community has its interests and they need to do things, we're all interconnected. And, you know, growth in this community here, growth in Baldwin, growth in Hudson, any of these communities, growth. And then I've also, because I've been on the St. Croix Economic Development Board, you know, you look for participation from the towns, okay? And the towns go, well, what do we get benefit out of that? You know, they're going to locate the business in River Falls, they're going to locate the business, they're not going to put it here in the town. Well, but where are the people in your town going to work? They're going to go to work in one of those communities. They're going to be there. And so, you know, again, I think things are interrelated. I think that, you know, we're not separate and distinct. And on the other hand, I understand the political realities of those issues. And it's important that, you know, because some of the funding sources come from the public sector and the private sector, what I think is important is to simply understand that there is this interconnectedness, and then actively promote your community, promote the assets of your community, and but keep in mind that it's not a win-loss thing. We're not keeping score up here as far as, because generally, if it's what the win-loss ought to be is whether somebody decides to, you know, take their plant that's in Osceola and now they're going to produce in Mexico. That's a loss, because now those jobs are gone, And now you have lost something there. And not only those jobs, but the grocery store and the gas station and everybody else that's in the community. Then you've lost, those are the kind of the win-loss situations. But, if somebody, I live in Baldwin, it's the Baldwin Woodville School District. If a business decides to locate in either of those communities or decides to expand, more likely to expand their business in either one of those communities, it's all in the same school district. Our tax bills are going to benefit, my tax bill is, there's going to be more of a tax base for that in either one of those communities. And so it's a win-win either one, okay? And so just keep that in mind. So that's kind of I'll get off my soapbox on that and move a little bit here to talking some of the, let's see here, I gotta get my, I had that on the front of here. Just shift to my outline here for a second. So you are, even though, as I say, I think you have to keep in mind the interconnectedness of these communities, I think, what do you need to get economic development in your community? Well, the first thing is, I think you need to figure out, what are the assets? What is it that you have in your community that's going to make it attractive to business? And we represent a lot of different communities, and I can tell you that the biggest item in my mind, because in addition to us representing municipalities, I represent a lot of businesses that are looking at different municipalities to relocate their businesses or expand their businesses. And the first thing that I would say to municipalities is, you got to have kind of an open door policy. You don't, especially now, people can have the pick of places where they go. Everybody wants them because everybody wants some economic development. And so you need to have an open door policy. You don't need to set up roadblocks for somebody that wants to come to your community. You have, you want to have businesses come that are compatible with the community. You want them to locate in a compatible location within the community. You want them to bring their jobs, you want them to bring their tax base, but they have a choice. They can go any place, and as I said earlier, it is highly unusual that somebody picks up their business and moves someplace else. It just, as a practical matter, just doesn't happen. They're going to expand, and so when you do get one of those folks that comes along and they're looking at your community, you need to figure out a way to make it work, as opposed to a way that's saying, well, we can't do this, and we got this deal over here, and you're not, you need to at least figure out a way that hopefully can make it work. I'll tell you a story about this that kind of ties in with Kevin. My dad's an civil engineer. My brother's in construction. He was involved, he was in charge of renovating the state capitol. Then he went down and he redid Camp Randall. And now my brother's in charge of the construction at Epic, which Kevin was talking about, that's outside Verona, this medical records place. He tells me he'll be able to retire there because they'll continue to build until it's time for him to retire. But what he said is Judy, who owns Epic and pays cash for everything that they've got out there, he said she asked for some pretty strange things. I walked into an auditorium down in, that they were in the process of building, not the one that they just finished, which seats is 5 stories underground and seats 11,000 people. This was a prior auditorium, and it was, we're kind of in that kind of a setting, but this had a sloping ceiling that went up like this, and so it had 2 columns in the back that's holding up the roof, okay? And Judy walks in one day and she says to my brother Jim, she says, what are those columns? And Jim says, well, that's what's holding up the roof. And she says, well, we can't have those columns there. She said, that destroys the karma. They won't be able to see these people, and they'll be disconnected. And he said, we can't have those there. And she says, well, Judy, they're holding up the roof. She said, I don't, got to get them out of it. So I'm not quite sure how they did it, but they did redesign things to move those columns out of there. And so one of the things that Jim has learned, he said, is that, Judy asks for some pretty strange things. And what you have to remember is the first thing is don't say no. Don't say that's impossible to do, Judy. We can't do that. What you need to do is say, yes, we can do that. It may turn out after 6 months of trying, you cannot do it. That's exactly what you thought to begin with. But the first thing out of your mouth cannot be, no, we cannot do that. And so what I would say to communities is, the first thing out of your mouth ought to be not, no, that doesn't work here, or you don't fit this, our particular model. The first thing out of your mouth ought to be, yes, we can do it. I think we got this, but I think we can figure out a way to do that. Then if you work at it for 6 months, and it turns out you can't do it, now you've built a relationship with that business. Now you've gone through some negotiations with them. Now, you've built up some trust. And, then if you say, you know what, for this particular aspect, this is the only way we can do it. We can't run the utilities a mile out there with no other development in between you and us and make that work. It's just economically, it's just not going to work. We'd like to do it. Can't you relocate 2 blocks beyond the end of the line instead of, a mile and a half? And so one of the things I would encourage, as I said, have an open door policy. That's the first thing out of the blocks. Make it, make them feel and understand is that we want to make this work. We want to make it happen. And, there are communities and some are more open to those things and some are not. I would just encourage everybody to be open to possibilities. And, one of my philosophies is, you keep all your options open as long as possible, and you don't cut off any options that you don't have to cut off until the last possible moment, because it just leaves you the flexibility. So think about that as attributes of the community. Then you've got just the basics, where are you? Location's big, we're in a great location. I mean, this whole part of the state, it's great because you got the attributes of the Twin Cities, but you can live out here and you don't have to have any of the headaches of the Twin Cities. So location's important. Your infrastructure, what are your roads? Do you have rail access? How close are you to your airport? There's an airport here, there's an airport in Osceola. You got the Twin Cities. I can get in my car, and before you used to have to go through, all the security stuff, I can get my car in Baldwin, and in 45 minutes I could be on an airplane heading someplace, at the airport. Well, now it just doesn't work that way anymore. But, those kinds of things for businesses that involve travel and stuff like that, that's an important factor. My experience has been the schools are a huge deal. Your school district, your school facilities, the quality of those, which, in my experience, I've been around with most of these schools and been involved in them. We have that. That's an asset. So, that's an asset that, everybody has that's in the area. But then to actually have this development happen, you've got to kind of be proactive. And I think back in the early, this is probably about 83, 84, 85, Baldwin had no industrial park, and they ended up, Baldwin sits there at 63 and 94, and they spent someplace north of $2 million to acquire real estate, and they had, not to acquire the real estate, but they bought the farm that was there to be developed. Well, and it didn't sell because, people came by and they looked at the corn, and we tried to say, well, this would be a nice place to put your business, and they go, well, but it's cornfield, So then the village didn't have a business, and they spent big dollars, and they put in the infrastructure. They put in roads. They didn't put all the roads into the park, but at least you could see there's a lot there. And, they put in the sewer and water, they put in the gas, and eventually they got one business, But they had to upfront all that money. Well, that's a risky proposition, especially now in tight times, to do that. But they had to be proactive. They had to have something to sell, or they weren't going to get anybody to locate there. And so they did that. They spent the money. Eventually, they got one. It got to the point where that industrial park was full, and they had to do another one. And that one, they're still waiting for that to come along, because that kind of happened about the time that the economy turned down. But those facilities and those attributes are necessary to be there. You have to have that infrastructure and have that available, just kind of as a starting point, because other communities that you're competing with, they're going to have that infrastructure. The next item, just the governing body. If you want to have economic development and you want to have it happen, again, maybe this ties into that open door policy, is just say yes to begin with. And that is, you need to have a governing body that's enthused about economic development. They have to understand how that fits into the overall community development and the overall quality of life that's in that community. And it takes money. It just does. And nobody likes to have their taxes raised. But there are things that can be done. But all of the things that I think that are critical, it's more of an, with respect to the governing body, isn't a dollar and cents thing. It's an attitude thing. We want people here. We have a good school. We have the infrastructure here. This is a good place to live. These are the attributes, and you've got to have somebody that from the governing body that's enthused about that. Same way with the committees that are making it up. People are going to have a planning commission that they're going to deal with. Those people, you don't want haphazard development. So you got to have rules, and you got to have zoning, and you've got to have these various things. And but again, approach those as tools to make things work, as opposed to tools to not make things work. That's the difference in my mind, and that's where I've seen communities stumble, is when they've been in that situation. Another thing that I think is a key is you need a point person. You need somebody that's going to be kind of the one-shot person. I'm dealing now with the folks in Madison with respect to this Minnesota deal, and one of their big goals down there is to streamline the process. Have a point person, a go-to person. My experience has been that there's going to be somebody in the community that would be good to fill that role. It's a retired banker. It's a retired business person. It's somebody that's been in business. They've got some time. You need somebody that can kind of do the initial contacts, the initial schmoozing, that knows the people in the community, that can help make those decisions, and do some of the behind the scenes workup and get them information, so that if I'm a business and I'm coming to the community, I don't want to call up Agnes and say, well, Agnes, what do I need to know here? And Agnes says, well, I can tell you this, but then you got to go over and talk to Craig about that. And and then Craig says, well, I can tell you this, but you got to go talk to Tom. People, they're busy people. They don't really, relocating their business, expanding their business. That's not what they're in the business of doing. They're in the business of running their business. And that's a full-time thing. So this is all over and above that. So you need to make it easy for them. You need to have a contact person so that they can have that kind of one-stop shopping, as I say. The financial institutions need to be on board. I mean, they're the key drivers of the loans, the money that are needed. These projects don't come for free, and they need to be a little bit creative. I remember these interest rates are going to tell you that this was a while ago, but there was a community that interest rates, home loans were like 8-9%, something like that, and they were in that ballpark. And the community bank said to this business, if you locate here, anybody that works for your business for the next 2 years that locates in this community, we'll loan them money for the house at 4%. It was like 50% of whatever the going rate was. Well, you think about that and you think, oh, that's kind of going out on a limb, and that's kind of, kicking some money out the door from your business model. But think about it. First of all, from a perspective of saying yes as opposed to saying no, that's really a big yes to somebody that's looking at your community. The other thing is, as a practical matter, how many people are going to move to the community within that time frame? So let's say it's a dozen. So you've got a dozen loans that are in-house, that you weren't able to sell on the secondary market, and you've got them for a couple of years. Well, you know what? They either bought a house that wasn't there, or that was there. They built a house that wasn't there. They employed some other people. I mean, the banks, they got their money back. But that was something a little bit creative, and it's not something that somebody would typically do. But again, that's saying yes to the community. Then I think you need to keep in mind, and this again is for expansion, which is most business development, most economic development is expansion, but relocation as well, is you got to think about how the money's going to work. And that's something that I get involved in a lot because that's just kind of my niche in the world. But, you know, I've listed here on the first Regional Business Fund, headquartered over in Eau Claire, U.S. Small Business Administration, United States Department of Agriculture, T-grants. I worked on a deal this summer. 3 years ago, we tried to put this deal together, and it didn't go anywhere. It should have gone somewhere, but for various reasons it didn't. It gets resurrected along about April this year. And it was the sale of a business, and the business expanded within a small community. And the funding that put that deal together included an SBA 7A loan, which I believe dealt with equipment and inventory, an SBA 504 loan that dealt with some of the real estate. The local bank provided some of the financing. The regional loan fund provided a part of the piece for the real estate, and then that got taken out by the SBA, but they left a piece in, so they had part of the real estate finance. The seller took and provided a little bit of the financing, and as I said, the local bank provided financing. So there was 5 different funding sources to make that deal go together. Well, you need some cooperation to make those kind of things happen. In that particular case, the bank was the driving force. They, you know, they just worked on it. They, you know, if you're getting SBA funding and you're getting the regional loan funding, it's because the buyer doesn't have a ton of money, because you don't qualify for those funds unless you need some additional mezzanine financing, sort of middle of the road financing, and so. But that's how you need to put these deals together. It needs funding from a large number of sources. The other thing you need to do is you need to involve some professional people. In the large communities, you know, you got Richmond, Hudson, Menominee, River Falls. They have staff people, you know, but a lot of the smaller communities, they don't. So you need to get a consulting engineer. You know, you need to have accountants because they're going to look at projections for you or do calculations to see whether a TIF district is going to work, or financial consultants. Around here, Ellers does a lot of work for people in various communities. We worked with them for a number of years. You know, they can put these packages together. You need some planners. I mean, it can't, you know, again, say yes, but you got to have a planner. You got to have an idea about what you want to have happen here, because you know, the quickest way to diffuse some accelerated economic development is you end up with something that's a hodgepodge, because then they come in and look at it and say, well, what's this? You know, I mean, I don't want to put my business, I mean, I got my heart and soul in this business. I don't want to put it here in a situation where it doesn't really fit. Then, you know, utilize, you know, in this area, there's economic development directors, you know, Paul Mayers does work here in town. The city has some folks. Bill Rubin is around, a great resource person for this area. Steve Healy is up in Polk County. There used to be somebody in Pierce County there, without somebody now. But, you know, even if you're in the town and, you know, and there's something, you know, you think things aren't going to happen in towns. Well, you know, there's some pretty big ethanol plants that went up over there in Wheeler, stuff like that. That's jobs, that's economic development, and those things are there. And so those folks are good resources. You know, they have lots of connections. They're doing that all the time, and so they have the resources available to do that type of stuff. Let's see here. Janet was in the back of the room giving me the high sign, so let me just do it here a second. Economic directors. Questions. People have questions about economic development. Again, I from my perspective, that's probably my personality. It needs to be a team effort. I mean, you need to get the team together, and that team includes the municipal offices. The team includes the financing. The team includes the accountants. It includes the planners. It includes the engineers. You need to keep all of those people together, and you need a point person. Somebody needs to run the show, correct?
You need a head coach more than anything.
Yeah, you need somebody. It does, and
your point on this, and this is really confusing to a business that wants to pick up and move, which is rare.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
you have 19 different places to go. We kind of started 2 clicks and you're there on our website.
Sure.
And that was one of Mike's things. And
yep.
he's done a really good job with it, but
Yes, yeah.
it's,
But you're right. You need to have somebody that's kind of you know, the head coach, or you need a point guard. Somebody's going to run the show. You know, somebody. I gotta bring everything back to basketball and small people. But
sure, guys.
you need somebody to be in charge and have that program. And you know, those are the people. Those are the communities that are going to have the edge and have the ability to make things happen. And that takes, you know, some groundwork, just like any some preparation on the front end. But it pays benefits on the back end. So, other questions? Yeah.
I'm in Osceola.
Yeah.
And we have what we think is a gateway airport over
Yeah.
in Osceola. And you know, we're visited all the time by commercial aircraft from Island, from Polaris, and so on. And
Lower landing fees.
look, as a matter of fact, there aren't any landing
So
fees.
that's a good price.
And we discuss these issues at the airport, and we consider Governor Dayton to be our best friend at this airport, because the kind of passage of tax bills and other things in Minnesota is driving some of this airport activity into Osceola. It's quite clear, and there's going to be some. I will to talk about some of the things that are going to happen this month with respect to the governor and so on and so forth in Osceola. But
Yeah, he's coming up in this area, and that's actually tied in some stuff that I'm doing in the Twin Cities.
so you already know about that.
Yeah, I already know about that. So, but again, you know, I think for this particular area, you know, depending on the political will that happens to be there at one time or another, it's going to be, you know, more favorable in Minnesota and less in Wisconsin, or more in Wisconsin, less in, depending on what the issues. When I was, you know, when we first doing development in like, you know, 85, 90, that time frame there, you know, people said that, you know, I can build this building here just on what I'm going to save in workers' comp costs over in Minnesota. You know, well, that's not quite, you know, they got wind of that, and they kind of changed the rules of the game over there to make it a little less. But, you know, I think, I guess the message that I would have like that, even though I like to beat on people from Minnesota, and I told my wife, I don't think, we were talking about whether we can move now that our kids are grown, and I said, you know, I really don't think I can move to Minnesota. I just don't think I can do it. But, you know, but again, keep in mind that I don't think this is a zero-sum game. I mean, there's a lot of headlines, news, when Valley Carriage moves the headquarters over to Minnesota. Well, the bulk of the people that are working there are still living in Hudson. You know, for that business, I suspect, I know where that building is that they bought. It's right there in 94. It sat empty for 4.5 years. If I owned a business and I'm going to get a, let's just say it was a $4 million building, and I'm going to get it for $1.5 million, and it has what I need, and it's there, and I don't have to build, I don't have to go through the hassle of construction, I'm moving my business over there. Was that a loss for us, for Wisconsin? I don't know that it really was. I mean, the principals are still living there. They're in 5 or 6 different states. It's not like this is the only place that they're at. And so one of the things that I would say is you just need to keep, that's my 2 cents, maybe that's my soapbox tonight, is that it's not, I think it's important because we'll want those jobs over here, and you know, the governor here has promised so many jobs and that kind of thing, but I think you need to keep in mind that for us, whether they were in Osceola or Forest Lake or wherever, it's going to be a benefit for this part of the community, this part of the state. So give me the high sign if I don't stop, somebody shoots me. So, anyway. Thanks a lot, folks.